Well, our next slide is disorders of the hypothalamic pituitary axis. Hypopituitarism. One, you could stroke out the pituitary. You could infect it out. Very rare. You could trauma and beat it out. You could cancer and displace it. You could squish it. It's like making chicken. You can fry it, boil it, bread it, fricassee it, lemon, pituitary, pituitary cordon bleu. So any way you want, you can destroy it here. You could tumor it out, freeze it out, burn it out, cut it out, chop it out. Come on down here to pituitary is ours, yeah. So the thing is that when you have a pituitary tumor, remember that when the tumor enlarges, it displaces and compresses the other tissues, the other cells. So nothing has to happen to them except it has to be compressed and it cuts off its blood supply, and that's it. Now, it is very hard to have isolated pituitary deficiencies, though. Here it says isolated deficiency, growth hormone. Very hard to have an isolated pituitary deficiency of just one of the hormones. Very rare. Because why is it that you'd get destruction of just one little piece of the pituitary hormones? That's why most people have hypothyroidism, have hypothyroidism at the basis of their thyroid burns out. To just have an isolated low missing the TSH, very rare. Isolated low just missing the ACTH, very rare. Almost all hypoadrenalism is from adrenal target organ deficiencies. Target organs are the way to be deficient. Very rare to be isolated single cell lines in the pituitary. Now, stimulation testing, this is a bit of a repeat of what we did before. I inject something that comes out of the hypothalamus and I try and give my pituitary a kick and stimulate and see if it works. GnRH with LH and FSH, thyrotropin, releasing hormone assays. Using these releasing hormones as a means of diagnostic testing is very good in terms of physiology, however, rarely if actually ever done clinically. Next slide. Sheehan syndrome. Now, Americans generally don't like eponyms, eponymous names, naming something after someone, because you go, what's a Sheehan? But if you say pituitary infarction syndrome or pituitary apoplexy, oh, you go, right, well, I don't know what it is, but the pituitary is weak. That's why it is better in general for us to use terms, and as we shift over time. For instance, even in America, we don't say Lou Gehrig syndrome, we say amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Because at least it gives some clarity and knowledge just from the name. Do you have Berger's disease? Well, I don't know, I have IgA nephropathy. You have Berger's, what is it? I don't know, I'm naked. Well, IgA nephropathy. Well, I don't know what it is, but I know that my kidneys suck and it's autoimmune and I got an IgA problem. So it is better to use a term that has actual medical meaning. Now, Sheehan syndrome means that in pregnancy, the pituitary enlarges. Okay, more blood supply. Your breasts enlarge, your pituitary enlarges, your plasma volume goes up by 50%. And then the problem is that after delivery, you have blood loss sometimes. See this one said with severe blood loss. And the problem is that of all places, your pituitary can selectively infarct off. Wow, of all the places. Panhypopituitarism. All of the cell lines. Next slide. Pituitary adenomas. Now remember that an adenoma is not necessarily a malignancy. An adenoma is not necessarily a malignancy. Matter of fact, most are not. No, when you say, what's an adenoma then? Is it, it's not normal? No. It's not hyperplasia? No. It's not dysplasia? No. It's not malignant, but it's not just hyperplasia either. It's like a personality disorder. What is it? Are you schizophrenic? No, but it's like a personality disorder. So it's not quite the same thing. So the thing is that pituitary adenomas, when they're really large, they compress the rest of the tissue. Now what's more common, micro or macro adenomas? Micro is far more common. Well, it's understandable. You start out small and then it gets larger. So what's more common? What's more common is small. Well, you go to certain countries and 50% of the population is under the age of 18. Whole countries are like that. 50% of the population. Why? Because smaller, younger, then they grow up later on. That's why there's more people alive on the planet now, today, 6 billion plus, than have been alive in total in the entire history of the world. Well, because they're smaller. Smaller is always more common. They could get bigger later on, but you got to start smaller. Microadenomas don't have, you see what it says, no panhypopit? No panhypopit because they're too small to compress the normal tissues. Macroadenomas, when they're really large, compress the normal tissues, can compress the optic chiasm. Now, usually benign means that they're not going to metastasize, and I'll tell you the other thing. Malignancies are not functional. The same way criminals don't pay their taxes. Criminals don't obey the rules. They don't pay their taxes. They aren't good citizens of the society. In the same way, malignancies are not good citizens of the body. They're not under normal suppression, and they don't make their normal hormone. That's why it's more often adenomas, because adenomas are functional. They make things that you can detect. This is a very big question here. You see this? Hyperprolactinemia, 60%. That is a massively important question, because if you said to me like this, hey, Conrad, hey, fishy, give me the bottom line. What's the one question? I don't want to learn all this. Give me one question about pituitary, and I'll learn it. Okay, you ready? Most common macro, most common microadenoma, prolactin. Erectile dysfunction in men, and galactorrhea, amenorrhea in women. Men who don't have erections and ejaculations, women who have too much breast flow. You get dry men and juicy women. Prolactinomas, most common. Now, let me make another little point here. I'm in live classes with a couple of thousand medical students and doctors a year. And when I ask them what they think the most common presentation of pituitary tumors is, 85% say bitemporal hemianopsia and headaches. About 85 years ago, Harvey Cushing invents neurosurgery. Harvey Cushing was the first major student, first resident of the great Sir William Osler, who started internships and residencies in this country. Osler, who says, happiness lies in the absorption in some vocation which satisfies the soul. Happiness lies in the absorption in some vocation which satisfies the soul. Cushing did a residency with him for 7 years. Cushing basically single-handedly invents neurosurgery. Cushing's syndrome, Cushing's disease, Cushing's reflex. What's Cushing's reflex? Bradycardia and hypertension associated with increased intracranial pressure. Bradycardia and hypotension with elevated increased intracranial pressure. Cushing is operating between the years 1910 and 1935. He's operating for about those 25 years. He's operating on brains with no MRI. He's operating on brains with no CAT scan. He's operating on brains, and prolactin hasn't even been described yet. How does Cushing even know the tumor is there? They never heard of prolactin. If you're a guy with erectile dysfunction, you got a problem. If you're a woman who can't conceive, it's a religious disorder. However, how did he operate, know that they were there? Headache, bradycardia, hypertension, bitemporal hemianopsia. How did Cushing know? Because he only saw the huge ones. He only knew that the really big ones were there. Bitemporal hemianopsia. Now, I'm going to tell you there's a little defect in medical education. Part of the reason that I'm making this recording with you today is to be able to reach out throughout the entire known world and protect you from your own medical schools. Why is it that in this year, at the beginning part of the 21st century, current medical students and doctors are told about bitemporal hemianopsia as the most common presentation, when it was the most common presentation 100 years ago or 80 years ago? How come you're getting your brains ruined by your own faculty? Well, if it was just you, one person, I'd say it was your problem, or just 2 people, or just 3 people. But when it's thousands of people, it's a systemic problem. We're here to correct certain defects, and that defect is this. Microadenoma is the most common, well, prolactin is the most common, and prolactinomas present with dry men and juicy women, and that's it. Bitemporal hemianopsia is more common in men because men present later. Thank you very much, and it's microadenomas. Big deal. Protect yourself from your own medical school. And that is the end of this chapter on the hypothalamus. But remember that the biggest other question is, when the pituitary stalk gets cut, only prolactin goes up, because prolactin is inhibited all the time by dopamine coming out of the hypothalamus. Why are we inhibiting prolactin all the time? Because the same way I don't put fresh food out on a table when I'm not going to eat it for 9 months. You shouldn't start lactating at your bachelorette party. You should wait until there's someone there to need the milky. So your prolactin should be inhibited until it's time for somebody to drink. Same idea. Why, if somatostatin inhibits growth hormone, why does the cutting the pituitary stalk not raise the growth hormone? Because the major stimulant to the major action on the pituitary for growth hormone is the stimulating hormone, growth hormone releasing hormone. When you lose the pituitary stalk, you lose both growth hormone releasing hormone and you lose somatostatin. What? Losing the stimulant is more important. The end.